So reality is such a strange thing, right? Some people feel like we know things when they haven't even happened yet, which is intuition. It's not the thought, it's more the feeling. Intuition is the feeling, yet it's attached to the predicting. And for some of us, it feels like odds. If you ask somebody for a favor, you might think, well, this is going to be 50-50, 20-80, meaning like no chance in hell that this person's going to help you out. So, through our predictive processing, which is how we retain the knowledge of what's going on in our reality. So, it's kind of like watching a movie, but through VR glasses, and everything that happens in them glasses happens to you, not physically, but it tells your mind that you felt it, so it sends the signal anyway. So imagine if you had no nerve endings. Imagine if your brain did not send or receive signals from the rest of your body saying that you had pain. It would feel just like a movie. Just like to a psychopath, having empathy seems like a movie. It's like, why would that person, react this way when I never feel sad about anything? So it's a good similarity between psychopathy, empathy, reality, and feeling. So through that, we're trying to control our narrative, which is how we make sense of our predictive processing. Let's say you go to a bar and, you start drinking. Your little micro errors that are questioning the odds of things happening in your reality are slowly diminishing. Those micro errors are what tell you, I'm not going to ask this person this because I don't think they're going to help. And then what's the point of asking if they're probably not going to help? I mean, you tell me I got a zero chance to win on a lottery ticket because all the big winners have already been taken, but I'm going after the big winners. Am I gonna, still try to hit on a big winner on that roll? So it's like the odds are zero. Why would I spend the money? Same thing. Why would I spend the effort when in my reality I'm trying to control my narrative to make sense of my predictive processing? Where, if the odds are tiny, it's not going to do any good. If anything, it's going to create more problems. It's like you have a zero chance and you buy a lottery ticket anyway, and you say to yourself, well, no, that's not a winner. There's got to be a big winner in there. So you keep going and going and going. So eventually our reality crashes and says, okay, we're out of money, out of the roll, and we still didn't hit big. We still didn't get that dopamine. And we're thinking our intuition told us that there was something in there, but we didn't get it. So now we start doubting our own intuition. We start doubting everything about us. And then somebody else walks in, buys one lottery ticket, and gets $1,000 a week for life. And now you're thinking, what was the odds of that? You're thinking, if only I could go back in time and get that lottery ticket instead of spending all the money on these lottery tickets I knew had zero chance of winning big. Wow. This whole reality thing, it's insane. It's I was just watching a video about this guy talking about Grand Theft Auto, and the predictive processing is seeing these cars and these people, and you're doing whatever the hell you want. You're in control of your narrative, yet you already kind of understand what you're playing because you've been playing it. So you understand the game. And considering there's no pain involved, there's really no time loss if you die, because in game missions, like, you're meant to die to get better, right? And so, there's look at games like Elden Ring. You know, how many people have spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours playing this game, and you know they get better, right? But not everybody has the same determination. Not everybody has the same uh, ability to notice those little factors and the patterns that would make them excellent players. Not everybody has that patience, that focus. You know, they're playing the game, but it's a distraction which kind of blocks out the narrative of the real world, which is great because it's nice to take a break from that narrative, not having to control that narrative. And so our predictive processing, it's like, like I was saying, you go to the bar. Now your micro errors stop. You're getting dopamine because you're no longer focused on those odds and micro errors. You're feeling ballsy. You're like, man, I never would have been able to do this sober. Then you black out. Okay, what happens to your predictive processing then? Well, it's on a subconscious level because you're obviously not aware you're blackout drunk. So then you wake up the next day and you're in jail. What happens? Your reality is trying to construct itself as fast as possible, trying to remember what you can't while you were drunk, blackout drunk. So the subconscious doesn't even tell you what happened. You just know you were getting ballsy, you blacked out, and now you're in jail. And so your entire reality has to reconstruct itself so you can figure out what your narrative is. You're probably going to be yelling to the guards, hey, what am I in here for? And they're going to tell you, and what's that going to do to your reality? You're going to say, whoa, I did not do that. I did not do those terrible things such as burning down the bar like you're saying I did right now. That's not me. But that's where it gets dangerous with disabling those micro errors. We go from odds to this is a different person that you're talking about. So the connection there, it takes a lot of time for the brain to reconstruct the reality to make sense of it. If you can't make sense of your reality, you can't make sense of your narrative. And if you can't make sense of your narrative, then you're going to feel vulnerable at all times around those that seem to have their narrative in control. So, it's like with money, it's security, If you go spend 50 grand at a horse race, thinking, well, the odds are, 50-50, you're telling yourself that. Then when you lose, you just lost that little bit of security that you had, thinking you were going to be able to get more security. So when that happens, our brain tries to reconstruct and say, okay, well, now we have to figure out another path because I was looking at that 50% that I was going to win. I didn't even want to consider the 50 that I wasn't going to win because I didn't plan for that. I was planning for, going a little over the bar of if I won. You're not planning, not everybody is planning in the way that they know what house they're going to get, they know what they're going to do with their money, they know where they're going to invest, they know who they're going to, well, they probably thinking about who they're going to buy stuff for, because in their reality, they're going for that money for a reason. So they're thinking, well, if I get that money, I can get a lot of easy validation. But once that money's gone, the validation stops, and you're desperate, thinking, well, I was able to make sense of reality when I had that security, that validation. That was a security blanket that wasn't even real. And it just, reality doesn't seem to make sense at that point. So then we start feeling helpless because now we've lost control of our narrative. It's like drugs. Why do we do drugs? Well, because we don't want to deal with the reality, the narrative, and the feeling that we're not in control. When we do drugs, a lot of times we're not feeling in control. It's more the lack of micro errors saying, hey, we're in control. So it's literally just a lack of micro errors, because if you had those micro errors while you were drunk or high, you probably wouldn't be doing it. And if you did, you'd probably do it, all the time. So that's going to be you're going to seek those people that are going to make sense of your reality. So basically what I'm saying is, when you look at your reality as odds, you're going to constantly question, should I do this? Should I do that? Because you're looking at those odds as the dependency of your reality and understanding and narrative.